This is a series. This was an article published August 13th. It's a series on ancient Rome and the fall of the Roman Republic. And it's really, really quite interesting. Now, this guy writing for The Atlantic, it's a mainstream media thing. It's a left wing. He basically says the Trump supporters live in fantasy land and they're reactionaries. Clearly doesn't like Trump supporters. But here's what he says. Will the Trumpist party similarly ultimately prevail once they cross the Rubicon? I have been predicting for years that something resembling a civil war will arise, and something like Trumpists likely will carry the day in the short term. But a reactionary philosophy that rejects fact in favor of fantasy is economically retrograde and socially repugnant to the majority of Americans, can impose its rule only for so long. You know what's really funny about that? When you take out the fact that the Trump supporters are not the ones who believe in fantasy, but typically are the ones who are critically thinking. Not all of them. They have their zealots. What he's basically saying is the Trump supporters will win.
Well, we have all the guns,
Yeah, but the military and the cops have guns too. This is one thing that the right doesn't seem to understand. You know, I see these comments all the time. They were like, "How is the left going to win a conflict when the right are the ones with the guns?" I don't know. The right's the one that are leaving the military. The officers are resigning and quitting the police force and leaving in the establishment shills who are armed. But in this, if you're operating under the presumption that Trump supporters are going to win, and then say, but they can't hold power for long because, you know, insert disparaging comments about Trump supporters. Okay, well, if you look at the right, if you look at the thought leaders on the right, they're typically critical thinkers. They're biased. Like Daily Wire is a conservative biased site, but they don't post lies.
Correct.
Then the reality is it's the left that's retrograde and reactionary and in favor of fantasy. They think the economy is good right now. No, so what they're really saying is this guy, based on his assessment of ancient Rome and what's happening now, thinks there will be a civil war and the Trump side will win.
I wonder too, like when people say civil war, like, do they literally mean for the entire country, or do they just mean like in some region of it, you know, will be taken over? Because like
it would be the entire country.
Like, so we just got to claim Alaska and Hawaii somehow? It's just
no
in the package, or
so people. The problem with Americans is that their view of civil war is based on one of the most unique internal conflicts in history. The American Civil War was a union of states of different jurisdictions aligning against each other, whereas most civil wars are factions fighting everywhere in the country at the same time. So if you look at the Spanish Civil War and see like the different pockets that emerged of the Republicans versus the communists or whatever, and then they're fighting each other and then gaining more and more ground, and eventually they take over. I think Spain went, you know, military dictatorship or whatever. That's like, oh, okay, that's how a civil war operates. But Americans are like, there was the Mason-Dixon line, and then West Virginia became a state, and Virginia separated. And it's like, that's because each state was basically a country.
Right.
Was a sovereign state. And so when the Union got shaky, states seceded of their own accord without what other states thought. And then because of the conflict, the Confederacy joined forces to defend themselves against the Union. And that's why they called it the War of Northern Aggression.
Was there a big call from the citizenry to go to civil war, the American Civil War? Was that all like a government's?
I think it was a government thing.
All the governors just decided, right?
Not a governor thing. I think it was a government thing. I mean, the legislatures, and I think regular people didn't want it. But nothing could be done. I mean, first and foremost, slavery. Here's the other difference between a modern civil war and the past civil war. You can argue, and I think this, I agree with this, that slavery was so morally repugnant. Going in to stop slavery was a cause in unto itself. Meaning, if we had a state right now that was like enslaving people, I would be demanding the federal government, like, we cannot tolerate in our own country. It's a violation of all of our rights, and it must be ended immediately. And so I can certainly understand why the North was like, we're not going to let these states do this. First of all, they had continually passed laws that were like, we're going to get rid of slavery, and the South was mad about it and wanted to leave the Union. War breaks out. But when you have that moral issue, and I think everyone agrees, like, you know, it was a good thing to end slavery.
I agree, slavery was really bad.
Well, that's the thing. Like, name a person right now. Right. I'm sure there are some crackpot, you know, individuals and racists who are like angry about it, but 99.99% of everyone agrees.
Right.
It turned out properly. It was the right thing. Today, we do not have that moral issue. Our moral issues are like, I live in the mountains of West Virginia and I want to own a gun. Well, I'm from New York and I think you shouldn't be allowed to have one. Could you imagine? That makes no sense. There's no one's going to invade West Virginia to end the moral repugnance of gun ownership. And no one from West Virginia is going to go invade New York to stop them. They're going to be like, what's going to happen is West Virginia's going to be like, we out.
Yeah. I also had this thought, too, in my various dreams of secession. I had this thought that, like, I think the biggest divide, too, is urban-rural, in that even if a state were to succeed, its population centers are probably still going to be left-wing and still have outsized influence, even if, people, in the majority of the square mileage of it are right-wing. So, and I know this would never happen, but like, I don't know if it would make more sense to have, sort of city-states for liberals and then, everything else for the
They'd
conservatives.
fall in
I don't
2
know.
seconds.
Yeah.
They'd fall in 2 seconds. I think it is true that even in West Virginia, the states are blue. It's the craziest thing. People should check this out. Come to West Virginia. Go to central West. We were in central West Virginia in some small town. And the bars got the trans rainbow flag. And I'm like, we're in central West Virginia. And I'm like, I don't understand why even small urban centers become leftist.
The internet.
Yeah,
everything's
the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, there's actually a really interesting book by Jonathan Haidt, and he points out that conservatives and liberals actually have different brain structures, and that we are just fundamentally different, and it could just be naturally people with more left-leaning and progressive views tend to congregate among other people, and
Weaker people who need support and want to mooch off others.
And conservatives is kind of like, space, and like there's been polls, and it's like with conservatives, would you rather have to drive 10 minutes to get somewhere or walk 10 minutes? And most liberals will say, oh, I'll walk to the store. Most conservatives would prefer the drive, and those traits just kind of self-select you into that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah.